Imagine waking up one morning to the news that the world is on the brink of nuclear war, with just 13 days to prevent a catastrophe that could wipe out humanity as we know it. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a pivotal moment in modern history, a 13-day standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union that brought the world to the edge of nuclear war. The crisis began on October 16, 1962, when American spy planes detected Soviet nuclear missiles being constructed in Cuba. This discovery sparked a chain reaction of events that would test the mettle of world leaders and push the globe to the precipice of disaster. The U.S. had been monitoring Soviet activity in Cuba, but nothing could have prepared them for the shocking revelation of nuclear missiles just 90 miles from American shores. In the early 1960s, the Cold War was at its peak, with the U.S. and Soviet Union engaged in a bitter struggle for ideological supremacy. The Soviets, led by Nikita Khrushchev, had been seeking to expand their influence in the Western Hemisphere, while the U.S., under President John F. Kennedy, was determined to prevent the spread of communism. The stage was set for a confrontation, and Cuba, with its strategic location and leftist government, was the perfect flashpoint. The U.S. had already attempted to overthrow the Cuban government with the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. The Soviet decision to deploy nuclear missiles in Cuba was motivated by a desire to counter the U.S. military advantage and protect their socialist ally. Khrushchev believed that the presence of these missiles would deter a U.S. invasion and provide a strategic advantage in the region. However, the plan was not without its risks, and the Soviets were aware that the U.S. would not take the deployment of nuclear missiles lightly. The operation, codenamed Anadir, was shrouded in secrecy, with even the troops involved being misled about their true mission. As the U.S. discovered the Soviet missiles, Kennedy convened an emergency meeting with his advisors to discuss the crisis. The options were limited and the stakes were high. An attack on the missile sites could lead to a full-scale war, while a failure to act could embolden the Soviets and undermine U.S. credibility. The president chose a middle course, imposing a naval quarantine on Cuba to prevent any further missile deliveries. This move was a calculated risk, as it could be seen as an act of war, but Kennedy hoped it would give him time to negotiate a resolution. The quarantine was a bold move, but it was not without its challenges. The U.S. Navy had to be prepared to intercept any Soviet ships attempting to breach the blockade, while the U.S. Air Force was put on high alert in case of a Soviet retaliation. The world held its breath as the two superpowers engaged in a game of chicken, each waiting for the other to blink. The tension was palpable, with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Behind the scenes, a secret negotiation was underway. Kennedy and Khrushchev were communicating through a series of letters, each trying to outmaneuver the other. The U.S. was offering a deal. If the Soviets dismantled the missiles, the U.S. would not invade Cuba and would remove its own missiles from Turkey. It was a delicate dance, with both sides aware that a miscalculation could lead to disaster. The letters were a mix of diplomacy and brinksmanship, as the two leaders tried to find a way out of the crisis. As the crisis deepened, the world was gripped by fear. People stockpiled food and built bomb shelters, preparing for the worst. The media was filled with dire predictions, and the possibility of nuclear war seemed all too real. It was a time of great uncertainty, with the future of humanity hanging in the balance. The crisis had brought the world to the edge of the abyss, and it seemed that one wrong move could plunge the globe into chaos. On October 27, 1962, a US U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, killing the pilot and raising the stakes even higher. It was a moment of great tension, with the US and Soviet Union on the brink of war. The incident brought the world closer to the edge, and it seemed that the crisis was spiraling out of control. The US responded with a series of tough statements, while the Soviets continued to dig in their heels. In the end, it was Khrushchev who blinked. On October 28, 1962, he announced that the Soviets would dismantle the missiles in Cuba, in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade the island. It was a humiliating defeat for the Soviet Union, but it was also a relief for the world. The crisis had been averted, and the threat of nuclear war had been pushed back. The aftermath of the crisis would see a new era of diplomacy, with the U.S. and Soviet Union engaging in a series of talks to reduce tensions and prevent future conflicts. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a watershed moment in modern history, a reminder of the devastating consequences of nuclear war. It was a close call, with the world coming perilously close to the brink of disaster. The crisis had shown that even the most powerful nations can be brought to the edge of destruction, and that diplomacy and negotiation are essential in preventing such catastrophes. The aftermath of the crisis would see a new era of cooperation, with the US and Soviet Union working together to reduce the threat of nuclear war. In the years that followed, the US and Soviet Union would engage in a series of diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions and prevent future conflicts. The crisis had shown that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way forward, always a chance for peace. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a reminder that the world is a fragile place, and that the actions of nations can have far-reaching consequences. It was a wake-up call, a warning that the world must always be vigilant and work towards a more peaceful future. Today, the Cuban Missile Crisis serves as a reminder of the dangers of nuclear war and the importance of diplomacy. It was a close call, a moment when the world came close to disaster. But it was also a moment of great courage, a time when leaders put aside their differences and worked towards a common goal. The crisis had shown that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always a chance for peace. As we look back on the crisis, we are reminded of the importance of cooperation and the need for nations to work together to prevent such catastrophes. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more documentaries on the most pivotal moments in history.